Welcome to the deep dive. We take the crucial documents, the sources you bring to us, and really try to distill maybe 2 millennia of thinking into one conversation.
Hopefully the most informed conversation you can have on the topic.
Exactly. And today we're tackling a really ambitious request. Someone asked us to help them understand the whole thing when it comes to the story of Hannah.
Ah, yes. 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2, verses 1 through 11. It's short, but incredibly dense.
It seems like just a story about barrenness, a vow, the birth of Samuel. But it's so much more, isn't it? A spiritual blueprint, you called it.
Absolutely. And to understand the whole thing, like you asked, means seeing it's not just one reading. Our sources today are what's a comparative analysis. We're blending modern historical scholarship
Okay.
with the deep traditional rabbinic lore,
Okay.
Agada, the narrative stuff, and halakha, the legal side,
Right.
and then tracing the commentary right through, from the Talmud all the way to, say, 20th century thinkers.
So our mission today is to map out how this seemingly simple domestic drama becomes this foundational text for prayer, for theology, even for national destiny through Samuel.
Yeah, it's huge. We'll need to look at it through three different lenses, really. The historical composition, how it was put together, then the traditional narrative, how it was understood theologically, and finally, how that understanding kept evolving over centuries.
It sounds like we need to be textual archaeologists 1 minute, then storytellers, then almost historians of ideas.
That's a good way to put it. It demands shifting perspectives constantly.
Okay, let's unpack this, right? Let's start with that historical, critical foundation, because knowing when and why this story was actually compiled, that really changes how you read it, doesn't it?
Completely. So modern scholarship, it pretty much agrees that 1 Samuel is part of the Deuteronomistic history.
That's the big sweep from Deuteronomy all the way through 2 Kings.
Exactly, that grand narrative. And the consensus is that this whole thing was compiled, or at least finalized, during a time of major crisis, probably late First Temple period, maybe more likely during the Babylonian exile. We're talking, what, 7th to 6th centuries BCE?
And that timing is crucial for understanding the editor's agenda.
It's the key, really, because while the story itself, Hannah, Elkanah, Shiloh, it feels older, maybe like an oral tradition from the tribal period.
Yeah, it has that feel.
It was definitely shaped by these later Deuteronomistic historians. They weren't just recording history. They were crafting a theological argument. They needed to explain why Israel ended up in exile.
Okay, so they need an origin story for the monarchy, right? Something to
Wow.
explain the shift from judges.
Precisely. And the birth of Samuel, this miraculous birth narrative, it serves that purpose perfectly. It provides a pure spiritual starting point.
And you see this editorial hand most clearly in Hannah's song, that bit in chapter 2.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
1 Samuel 2, verses 1 to 10.
Mm.
The vast majority of scholars think this song was actually an independent poem, something pre-existing.
It does sound different, doesn't it? More like a psalm, sort of lofty and universal.
Exactly. It doesn't quite sound like a personal thank you for a baby. It was probably inserted because its themes fit so well, God reversing fortunes, lifting the poor, the barren woman having children.
That makes sense. But there's more to it.
There is. The real giveaway, the anachronism, is in verse 10. The song talks about God giving power to his king and exalting his anointed, Meshicha.
But wait, Hannah sang this before Samuel's even grown, decades before Saul, the first king. There is no king yet.
Bingo. That's the editorial fingerprint. The Deuteronomistic historians are projecting the later theology of the Davidic monarchy, which is their ultimate focus back onto Hannah's prayer.
So they're framing the future, telling the exiles maybe that even though kingship led to disaster eventually, it started from this pure, prophetic, divinely ordained moment.
That's exactly the message. It legitimizes the whole institution from the get-go, grounding it in prophecy.
And you also mentioned different sort of ideological layers in the text, like priestly versus prophetic views.
Yeah, you can definitely see a tension there. The story starts at Shiloh, the main sanctuary, with Eli as high priest. That points towards a priestly source concerned with, proper worship, sacrifice, the established cult.
Okay, makes sense.
But the hero who emerges isn't just another priest. Samuel becomes this prophet-judge figure. His authority comes directly from God, it's charismatic, and it kind of bypasses the hereditary priesthood of Eli's family.
So that reflects a different source, maybe a prophetic one that valued direct divine inspiration over institutions.
That's the idea. And when the final editors put it together, they subtly critique that old priestly order. Eli comes across as old, maybe a bit ineffective, spiritually dull. He can't even recognize real prayer.
Right, mistaking Hannah for drunk.
Exactly. It paves the way, narratively, for this new prophetic era to dawn through Hannah's piety and Samuel's birth.
And there's a specific clue in the language Hannah uses, a divine title.
Yes, this is fascinating. In her prayer, in 1.1, she calls God the Lord of Hosts, YHWH Tsevaha.
And that's significant because...
Wow.
Because, according to our sources, this is the very first time that specific title appears in the entire Bible.
Wow, okay.
And that title, Lord of Armies, Master of the Cosmos, Sovereign over everything, it reflects a later, more universal theology. It's likely the editors emphasizing God's broader power, moving beyond just a local Shiloh deity.
So it connects Hannah's personal plea to this grander cosmic vision of God, theological layering, like you said.
Precisely. It's quite sophisticated.
Okay, so we've got this compiled, edited text with different layers, but you also mentioned the text itself is a bit unstable. We need to talk about textual variants.
We do. Because this gets really interesting, especially if you want to understand the whole thing. 1 Samuel is kind of notorious for textual problems. The standard Hebrew text we use today, the Masoretic text, or MT, it often shows signs of, well, maybe errors, abbreviations, parts that seem a bit corrupted or shortened.
But we have other versions to compare it with.
Thankfully, yes. We have the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation, which is often much older than our surviving Hebrew manuscripts. And we also have fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, like 4Q Samuelae, which sometimes agree with the Septuagint against the MT.
So these can give us clues about potentially older or different readings.
Exactly. Let's take a classic example. The portion debate in verse 1.5.
Right, Elkanah giving Hannah her portion of the sacrifice.
The MT has this tricky phrase, akath mana apayim. It's usually translated as a double portion.
Which is often read as showing Elkanah's extra love for her, trying to make up for her barrenness.
That's the traditional reading, yes. But the Septuagint reads it completely differently. It suggests she got one portion only, though he loved her.
Whoa, that changes the meaning entirely.
It does. The implication then is that portions were given out based on family size, so Hannah, having no children, only got one share. But the text immediately adds, though he loved her, to make sure you don't think it was because he didn't care.
Just a few words difference, but a totally different picture of the dynamics.
It really shifts the nuance, doesn't it?
Okay, what's another example? You mentioned a hiccup with the sacrifice later on.
Yeah, or in verse 1.24. When Hannah brings Samuel to Shiloh, the MT says she brought 3 bulls. But then, just a couple lines later, it says they slaughtered the bull, singular.
Huh. So 3 or 1?
It feels like a mistake, right? But the Septuagint, and also one of the Qumran fragments, clears it up beautifully. They read, a bull of 3 years old.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. One prime animal.
Exactly. It looks like the MT scribe just dropped a word or two describing the age of the single bull, and the older versions kept the original logical reading.
It shows how easily texts could change in transmission.
For sure. And one more key example is the Nazirite vow. Hannah vows in 1.11 that no razor shall touch his head, which sounds like Samuel will be a Nazirite, like Samson.
Right?
But the MT is pretty brief about it. The Septuagint version of her prayer, though, and again supported by the Dead Sea Scrolls, has extra lines not in the MT. These lines explicitly mention the Nazirite rules, like not drinking wine or strong drink.
So the older texts make the Nazirite connection much stronger.
Much more explicit, yeah. It suggests the tradition identifying Samuel as a lifelong Nazirite was very old, even if the Masoretic tradition maybe downplayed it slightly, or perhaps those lines were just lost. It shows how even the characterization of Samuel could be subtly shaped by which textual tradition you followed.
Okay, this historical and textual background is crucial. It shows the text isn't monolithic. Now let's shift gears. How did traditional Jewish commentary, the sages in the Talmud and Midrash, take this story and, well, run with it?
Now we move from textual archaeology to theological construction. This is where the story becomes this incredible engine for ethics and law. The rabbis, centuries later, weren't just reading the text, they were living in it, filling the gaps, drawing out meaning.
Let's start with the family drama. Elkanah, Hannah, and Peninnah. The Bible paints Peninnah pretty clearly as the rival, the one provoking Hannah.
It does. She would provoke her sorely to irritate her. Pretty blunt. But the Midrash, the narrative commentary, adds these amazing layers. Well, for instance, some Midrashim say Elkanah only married Peninnah after 10 years of Hannah being childless. And even more striking, some suggest Hannah herself urged him to marry Peninnah.
Wait, Hannah suggested it? Why?
The idea was perhaps to provoke divine mercy through the suffering of rivalry, a kind of strategic self-sacrifice, hoping the pain would compel God to act.
That's intense. And how do they deal with Penina's actual provoking the taunting?
This is where it gets really complex theologically. The Midrash acknowledges the cruelty, Penina flaunting her kids, asking Hannah if she bought clothes for her non-existent son, things like that. But then some rabbis offer this interpretation, that Penina's provocations were lishma,
Meaning?
for the sake of heaven. The idea, however difficult it sounds to us, was that Penina's intention, deep down, was maybe to push Hannah to pray even harder.
That feels like a stretch, maybe even justifying bad behavior. How did they square that ethically?
That's the tension. The halakha, the legal side, would never endorse the cruelty itself. But the agada, the narrative side, is focused on the theology of suffering. Their point wasn't to excuse Penina, but to understand why God allowed Hannah to suffer.
So the idea is God wanted her prayers.
Exactly, that profound, almost radical idea. God desired Hannah's prayer, just like with the barren matriarchs. So the barrenness wasn't punishment. It was a divine setup, a loving challenge designed to elicit this incredibly deep, heartfelt prayer. Penina, in this reading, becomes an unwitting instrument in God's plan for Hannah's spiritual growth.
Okay, I see. It reframes the whole dynamic. It's not just jealousy, it's a theological crucible. What about the scene at Shiloh? Hannah praying silently, Eli's mistake.
The iconic moment. The Bible just says Eli thought she was drunk because her lips moved, but no sound came out.
Yeah.
But the Talmud, in Tractate Barakat, turns this short exchange into this incredible masterclass. When Eli confronts her, Hannah says, "No, my lord, lo Adoni."
Seems respectful enough.
But the rabbis perform this amazing interpretive jujitsu. They suggest reading lo Adoni not as "No, my lord," but as "No, you are not the Lord here," or even "You lack lordship," meaning spiritual authority.
Whoa, she's calling out the high priest.
In this rabbinic reading, yes. She's basically saying, if you, the high priest, can't tell the difference between profound prayer and drunkenness, then you lack the Shekinah, the divine presence. You lack true spiritual insight. She becomes this defender of authentic spirituality against clueless institutional authority.
That's a powerful image. Hannah standing up for herself.
Absolutely. And the Talmud actually cites this interpretation to teach a practical, ethical point. If someone unjustly suspects you of something wrong, you have a duty to speak up and clear your name forcefully. Her defense becomes a model for ethical conduct.
And then the really huge legacy, Hannah as the model for Jewish prayer itself.
This is arguably her most lasting impact. The sages in the Talmud derived multiple fundamental laws, the halaktot of tefilloh, of Jewish prayer, directly from the description of her actions in verse 1.13.
From just that one verse.
Yes. It's incredible. Let's break it down. First, Hannah was speaking in her heart. From this, they derive the absolute necessity of kavanah, proper intention, concentration, meaning it in your heart when you pray.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, only her lips moved. This taught that prayer isn't just mental. You have to actually articulate the words with your lips, even if softly. It needs that physical expression.
Got it. And the most famous one.
But her voice was not heard. This became the direct textual source for the central prayer of Jewish liturgy, the Amidah, being recited silently. The Tifillat Lashash, the whispered prayer. Millions observe this daily, based on Hannah's example.
Wow. So her silent prayer became the model for the silent prayer.
Exactly. And even Eli's mistake had a legal consequence.
How so?
His wrongly accusing her of being drunk led directly to the halakhic rule that you're forbidden to recite the Amidah if you're intoxicated. Sobriety is a prerequisite for that level of required reverence. Her authentic devotion literally set the standard, both positively and negatively.
Beyond the laws, the tradition also saw her as a prophetess, right? Connecting her personal story to bigger things.
Definitely. Her song predicts this great reversal. The barren woman bears 7, while the mother of many languishes.
Did the Midrash see that fulfilled?
Oh, yes. Tradition says Hannah went on to have more children, often counted as 5 more, plus Samuel making 6, with the 7 being symbolic or fulfilled in other ways. And tragically, the Midrash says Penina lost most of her children. It's a stark fulfillment of the reversal theme.
That's quite harsh.
It is, but there's often a coda added, a touching detail, where Hannah, seeing Penina's grief, prays for her remaining 2 children to be spared. It shows compassion, even amidst the reversal.
And her status as a prophetess.
The Talmud explicitly lists Hannah among the 7 prophetesses of Israel. They credited her song, especially the mention of the future anointed one, as genuine prophecy, foreseeing King David long before he appeared. Her personal prayer becomes linked to the messianic future.
It connects the micro and the macro.
Beautifully. And they found meaning, even in her name, Hannah. connecting it to the Hebrew word for grace,
Hmm.
Chen. And that use of Lord of Hosts, YHWH Shedis the Ritzko, the rabbis, imagined her saying essentially, Master of the universe, you command legions of angels, stars, people. Is it really so hard out of all those hosts to grant me just one son?
Wow. Using the highest theology to leverage her very personal human need.
Exactly. It's bold, intimate, and theologically profound all at once.
Okay, we've seen the historical context, the textual variations, and the foundational rabbinic readings. Now we need to trace how commentators over the next 2 millennia kept wrestling with this story.
This is the evolutionary lens, right?
This is where you see how each era brings its own questions, its own methods, its own concerns to the text. We start right after the Talmudic period, say, with the foundations laid then.
We already touched on the Talmudic sages using darash, creative exposition for law and ethics, like deriving the rule about apologizing if you suspect someone wrongly from Eli's blessing. Exactly. That set the stage. Then jump forward to the 11th century to Rashi in France, the absolute giant of medieval commentary.
What was Rashi's approach? You called him a synthesizer.
He was. His primary goal was pashat, the plain, straightforward meaning, grammar, context. But if the plain meaning left a question unanswered, like why did someone do something, or what's the deeper theological point, Rashi wouldn't hesitate to bring in a midrash and a Gaddic story to explain it.
So practical clarity was key for her.
Yes, clarity for the average educated reader. And we saw how he handled Lord of Hosts, giving both the philosophical depth and that simple, powerful plea for a son. He makes the text accessible, but also theologically rich.
And you mentioned his context in Christian Europe mattered.
Definitely. When Rashi highlights the messianic interpretation of Hannah's song, seeing it point towards David and the Jewish Messiah, he's subtly reinforcing Jewish identity and hope. In a context where Christians were applying similar prophecies like Mary's Magnificat to their own narrative, it's a quiet assertion of Jewish continuity.
Okay, but then almost immediately, in the next century, you get a very different vibe with Ibn Ezra in Spain.
Oh, a huge shift. Abraham Ibn Ezra was all about pure peshat. Grammar, logic, rationality. He was often implicitly pushing back against Rashi's use of midrash, which he felt sometimes obscured the plain sense.
So how did Ibn Ezra read, say, Hannah's silent prayer?
Purely logically. He argued the text only mentions her lips moving because Eli happened to see her and made a mistake. Otherwise, it was just a private prayer, internal between her and God. No need to derive universal laws from it. It was just narrative detail.
More literal, less expansive.
Much more focused on the text's internal mechanics. And he was very aware of textual issues, like the portion debate. His solution for the MT's tricky pain was linguistic, connected to anger or face, suggesting Elkanah gave her a special portion to appease her sadness, using grammar to defend the MT.
And the song, did he see it as prophecy?
Less so. He leaned towards seeing hyperbole, powerful poetry. The Barren Bear 7 was an expression of faith in God's power to reverse things, not necessarily a literal prediction. It's a kind of protocritical realism creeping in.
That rationalist thread leads us straight to Maimonides, the Rambam, also 12th century. He wasn't doing line-by-line commentary, though.
No, Maimonides was the great codifier and philosopher. He extracted principles. We saw how he took Hannah's prayer behavior and locked it down as the normative law for the Amida in his code, the Mishnah Torah. It became definitive practice.
But he also had a philosophical take on the miracle.
Yes, he rationalized it in a way. He accepted the tradition that Hannah had Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. But he suggested her intense prayer and spiritual focus actually elevated her state, making her worthy of the divine response. The miracle wasn't arbitrary. It was earned through spiritual exertion.
Effort precedes grace, in a sense.
That's a good way to put it. Yet, interestingly, he didn't rationalize everything away. He fully accepted and codified the rabbinic tradition that Samuel was a lifelong Nazirite based on Hannah's vow. Tradition still held weight, especially in law.
Okay, fast forward a century to the 13th century, Radak David Kimmie. You called him a harmonizer.
Yes, Radak, working in Provence, really tried to find a middle ground. He wanted the readability and ethical insight of Rashi's midrashic selections, but also the grammatical precision of Ibn Ezra.
How did that play out with Hannah?
Well, he'd acknowledge the midrash about Peninnah's supposed good intentions, or the one where Hannah confronts Eli sharply, but then he'd gently steer back towards a plain sense. Hannah spoke respectfully, Eli apologized respectfully. He smoothed out the narrative edges.
More pastoral, maybe?
Definitely a pastoral tone. He drew out ethical lessons, like emphasizing how Hannah's face was no longer sad after Eli's blessing, but before she conceived. He highlighted the psychological and spiritual release that comes from trusting God, even before the answer arrives. Prayer itself heals.
Let's jump to the 15th century. Obarbano, after the expulsion from Spain. A very different context.
Hugely different. Don Isaac Abarbanel brings this historical political lens, deeply colored by the trauma of exile. He starts his commentary on Samuel by asking that big question: why start a book about kings and wars with this intimate family story?
And his answer?
It was strategic. To show that the monarchy Israel needed had to be grounded in true spirituality, born from prayer and dedication, like Samuel was. It was a necessary response to the corruption of the existing leadership, Eli's sons. He contrasts the pure origin, Hannah Samuel, with the decay.
So the domestic becomes political commentary again.
Absolutely. And writing as an exile, he really emphasizes Hannah's piety, her saintly restraint in not retaliating against Peninnah. He sees her emergence from despair as a model for Jewish hope and redemption after the catastrophe of 1492. Her story becomes national allegory.
Okay, now into the modern era, 19th century. Big changes happening. How did commentators respond? Let's start with Meldum in Eastern Europe.
Rabbi Meir Leibush ben Yehiel Michel, the Melbim. He was facing the rise of Haskalah, Jewish Enlightenment, and early Bible criticism. His project was intensely linguistic, to prove that every single word, every grammatical nuance in the Hebrew text perfectly supports traditional rabbinic interpretation, the halakha and Agadah.
A defensive strategy, almost.
Highly apologetic, yes, but brilliant linguistically. He'd dissect phrases like, weeping, she wept, to show the repetition indicates a unique intensity, justifying why the sages derived laws from this moment. He'd argue the specific verbs used for Hannah's prayer implicitly prove the rules about moving lips but not making sound.
What about those textual ambiguities we talked about, like the double portion?
Malbim aimed to resolve them definitively through linguistics. He argued a paim must mean a portion sufficient for two people. Why? Because Elkanah had faith she would have a child, so he gave her a portion anticipating that future child.
Wow, that neatly ties the text, the interpretation, and the character's faith together.
Exactly. It's a seamless integration designed to show the perfect coherence of scripture and tradition against modern challenges.
Meanwhile, in Germany, you have Samson Raphael Hirsch leading neo-Orthodoxy. A different approach.
Very different focus. Hirsch was addressing Jews integrating into modern society. He drew out ethical and communal lessons. From Elkanah's line, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" Hirsch derived the message about modern life.
Which was?
That human love, family bonds, while incredibly important, aren't enough. They can't replace the spiritual fulfillment that comes from dedicating oneself and one's children to God's purpose. Hannah needed a child for God's service.
A message about priorities for modernizing families.
Precisely. And Hirsch was also very strong on highlighting Hannah's agency. He stressed that she, a woman, is the first person in the Bible explicitly shown praying in this intensely personal, silent, fervent way. She initiates national change through her prayer, validating women's spiritual equality and power.
That leads nicely into the 20th century figures, Rav Kook in Israel.
Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, a profound mystic, and the first chief rabbi of British Mandate Palestine. He saw everything through a cosmic, spiritual, and often Zionist lens. For him, Hannah's story was an allegory.
An allegory for what?
Her barrenness and suffering represented the Jewish people in exile, the feeling of spiritual emptiness and dispersion. Samuel's birth, then, symbolized the beginning of redemption, the spiritual renewal happening as Jews returned to the land of Israel.
Wow. Her personal story becomes the national narrative of return.
Yes, and her silent moving lips. For Rav Kook, that was the soul's deepest prayer, beyond language, the inner music of the heart connecting directly with the infinite. Pure mystical interpretation.
And finally, Abraham Joshua Heschel in America.
Heschel, the great theologian of divine pathos, the importance of authentic religious experience. He seized on Hannah's prayer as the absolute paradigm of prayer as an event.
What do you mean by event?
Not just reciting words, but a genuine existential encounter, a cry from the depths of the soul, reaching out to a God who feels, who responds to human suffering. He emphasized God's sensitivity.
And he found proof of this in the text.
Yes, in that same detail Radak noted. Hannah's face was no longer sad after the prayer and blessing, but before she conceived. For Heschel, this proved prayer's power isn't just about getting what you ask for. It's about the inner transformation, the peace that comes from genuine connection with the divine.
It's truly amazing. 2 millennia, and this short narrative just keeps generating deeper and deeper layers of meaning. Okay, let's try to synthesize this. If we look across all these interpretations, historical, traditional, evolutionary, intricity, what are the enduring themes?
Let's take theme 1, Prayer and devotion, obviously central. The constant is Hannah's sincerity, her focus, her kabbalah. That's always the gold standard.
But the understanding evolved.
Massively. It starts very practically with the Talmud. Here are the rules for the Amida derived from our actions. Then it deepens in medieval times into contemplative communion, silent devotion. And by the time you get to Heschel, it's this profound existential act asserting meaning, connecting with God in a complex world.
Okay. Theme 2, prophecy and leadership. How does that evolve?
It started, as we saw with the editors, as marking a national turning point, justifying the shift to monarchy. Then, for medieval commentators like Rashi, it becomes specifically about predicting the Davidic Messiah, securing that lineage.
And later?
Later, especially with someone like Abarbanel, it becomes more about the quality of leadership. Righteous leadership emerging from piety from the oppressed as a necessary corrective to corrupt power. Samuel is the model leader born from prayer.
Makes sense. Theme 3, gender and agency. This seems particularly relevant now.
It really does. While the rabbis certainly praised her, you see this theme really comes to the forefront in modern interpretations. Hirsch, for instance, championing her as proof of women's spiritual equality and power to effect change. Her confronting the high priest, her prayer changing history. She becomes a key biblical example of female spiritual leadership and direct relationship with God.
And the last one, theme 4, justice and reversal. That core message in her song, he raises the poor from the dust.
Right, the theodicy aspect, God's justice. In earlier times, this was largely understood as theological hope. God will intervene, God will reverse fortunes eventually, a promise of future divine action.
But that shifted too.
In modern thought, particularly with thinkers who emphasize action in the world, it becomes less about just waiting for God and more of a moral imperative for us. If God raises the poor, then we, as God's partners, must work to raise the poor, to enact that reversal, to pursue justice now. The hope becomes an ethical demand.
So across all these lenses, critical, traditional, philosophical, mystical, the core power of the story remains.
Absolutely. Whether you're dissecting textual variants or exploring mystical allegory, the constant is the impact of one individual's sincere, heartfelt faith. Hannah endures because every generation finds its own struggles, its own hopes, mirrored in her story.
So what does this all mean? Well, think about it. You asked to understand the whole thing. And what we've seen is that the deeply personal pain of one woman, Hannah, expressed in this quiet, almost hidden prayer at Shiloh, it didn't just stay personal.
No, it fundamentally shifted things.
It became the spiritual spark for Israel's national leadership. It leads to Samuel, the kingmaker, who then anoints David. The whole trajectory changes.
A single prayer echoing through history.
Exactly. So here's the thought to leave you with. If one person's silent tears, offered with that kind of total sincerity, that Kavanaugh, could literally rewrite a nation's future, what kind of power, what potential for change lies hidden in your own most sincere, quiet moments of reflection or devotion today?
That deep dive really shows us, doesn't it? Understanding the whole document means seeing how authentic individual connection can be the very engine driving history and spirit forward.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.